The church smelled of lilies and rain-soaked wool, a scent I used to associate with springtime and renewal. Today, it smelled like endings. The wooden pew beneath me was cold and unyielding, and though the sanctuary was packed with friends and neighbors, I'd never felt more alone in my life. James lay at the front of the room, dressed in his best suit, the one I'd ironed so carefully the night before. He looked peaceful, almost like he'd just dozed off after one of his long afternoons spent tending the garden. I clung to that image, of him at home, alive, humming as he worked, because if I thought too hard about the stillness of his body inside that casket, my own heart might stop. The pastor's voice droned on, words about eternity and comfort that barely reached my ears. My thoughts floated in a fog of grief and exhaustion. The last 2 years of my life had been consumed by James's illness. Doctor's visits, hospital stays, nights spent dozing in a chair beside his bed, while machines beeped and hissed around us. I had poured every ounce of myself into caring for him, holding his hand, whispering promises that he wouldn't face it alone. And now, here I was, alone. Behind me, the sound of soft laughter shattered the fragile silence. My back stiffened. At first, I thought it must have been a nervous reaction, someone trying to stifle tears. But then I heard Claire's voice, low and sharp, followed by Daniel's muted chuckle. "She's next," Claire hissed. Daniel snorted under his breath. "Then the house is finally ours." The words sliced through me, cruel and deliberate. My breath caught, and for a moment, I couldn't move. Could they really have said that? My own children, my flesh and blood, laughing at the thought of me gone, like I was nothing more than an obstacle between them and a piece of property. I wanted to turn around to demand an explanation, but my body betrayed me. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the tissue in my lap so tightly it tore. I couldn't cause a scene here, not in front of everyone who'd come to honor James. So I did the only thing I could. I swallowed the sob clawing its way up my throat and stared straight ahead, willing my face into a mask of calm. But inside, my heart was breaking in a new and unexpected way. I thought back to the countless nights I'd stayed up sewing Halloween costumes, the mornings spent making pancakes shaped like smiley faces, the endless sacrifices made so Claire and Daniel could have every opportunity in life. How had we come to this moment, where my children weren't just ungrateful, but openly scheming against me? The pastor's closing prayer barely registered as the pallbearers lifted James's casket and carried him toward the waiting hearse. I followed in a daze, Claire and Daniel flanking me like dutiful children in the eyes of the crowd, while their whispered words still echoed in my mind. At the graveside, I laid a single white rose atop the coffin. My tears blurred the world, turning the gathered mourners into smudges of black and gray. As the final clump of earth fell with a hollow thud, I silently promised James that I would try to be strong, even though I felt like a brittle branch about to snap. Afterward, we stood in the drizzle outside the church, waiting for the cars to take us to the lawyer's office. The reading of the will, a formality I'd thought until this morning. Now, I wasn't so sure. Claire and Daniel chatted quietly beside me, their faces carefully schooled into masks of sorrow. But I knew what lay beneath. As we climbed into the car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rain-streaked window. My reflection looked older than I remembered, the lines of grief etched deep. I straightened my spine. Whatever lay ahead, I would face it. James deserved that much, and if my children truly saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone to their inheritance, then maybe, just maybe, I'd find the strength to fight back. The rain had eased by the time we reached Whitman and Associates, but the clouds still hung heavy and low, pressing down on the town like a weighted blanket. The building was old, a converted Victorian house with peeling white paint and dark shutters that seemed to watch as we walked up the stone steps. Claire pushed ahead of me, heels clicking sharply against the porch, her black umbrella spinning closed with a snap. Daniel followed close behind, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, head bent like a man with important business on his mind. I trailed after them, my breath fogging in the cool afternoon air. My legs felt wooden, each step an effort. James should have been here beside me, his strong hand warm around mine, ready to face whatever came next. Instead, I was flanked by two people I no longer recognized as my children. Inside, the lawyer's office was dimly lit and smelled faintly of old books and lemon polish. Heavy curtains framed the tall windows, muting the gray daylight. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, offering warmth that did nothing to thaw the chill inside me. Mr. Henry Whitman, our family attorney for over 20 years, rose from behind his massive mahogany desk as we entered. He was a dignified man in his 70s, with silver hair and kind, tired eyes. I'd always trusted him, and seeing his familiar face now brought a flicker of comfort. "Mrs. Turner," he said warmly, taking my hand in both of his, "I'm so very sorry for your loss. James was a good man." I swallowed hard and nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Claire. Daniel." His tone was polite but distant as he greeted my children. They offered tight smiles in return. We all took our seats at the long, gleaming table. Claire sat across from me, her designer coat perfectly arranged, her lipstick immaculate despite the rain. Daniel slouched beside her, tapping his thumb against his phone screen until Claire shot him a sharp look and he slipped it back into his pocket. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Before we begin, I'd like to express again my condolences. James was very deliberate in preparing this will. He thought carefully about each decision." I felt Claire's expectant gaze land on me. I didn't return it. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap, my knuckles white. Then, just as Mr. Whitman reached for a folder, he leaned slightly toward me, his voice dropping to a whisper so low I almost thought I imagined it. "Your husband knew," he said, his eyes full of quiet gravity. "That's why he left them nothing." My breath caught. "What?" I whispered back, the word barely audible. Before I could ask him to explain, he straightened and addressed the room at large. "Let's begin." The reading of the will was formal, precise, his voice steady as he recited the legal language. At first, it sounded like what I'd expected, mentions of debts paid, funeral expenses covered. Then came the part that changed everything. "To my beloved wife, Margaret Turner," Mr. Whitman read, "I leave our family home, all bank accounts, investments, and personal property in full." Claire's lips parted slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her perfect features. "In addition," he continued, "I have established the James Turner Community Scholarship Fund to be managed by Margaret, dedicated to providing educational opportunities to underprivileged youth in our town." I blinked through tears. James had always been generous, always looking out for others. This was so like him. "And to my children, Claire Turner and Daniel Turner." Mr. Whitman paused, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "I leave the sum of $1 each." The room went deathly silent. Claire's face flushed a violent red. "What did you just say?" Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Is this some kind of joke?" "I assure you it is not," Mr. Whitman said calmly, folding his hands atop the document. "Your father's wishes were made very clear. These provisions are legally binding." "You can't be serious!" Claire shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She jabbed a manicured finger toward me, her voice shaking with rage. She must have manipulated him. Dad would never cut us out unless she forced him to. Daniel's jaw clenched, his voice low and dangerous. "You tricked him, Mom. Admit it." My mouth opened, but no words came. I hadn't known about this, hadn't even suspected. I sat in stunned silence, the echo of Mr. Whitman's earlier whisper filling my mind. "Your husband knew." Claire whirled on the lawyer. "We'll contest this. You can't just—" "You are free to try," Mr. Whitman said evenly, "but I must warn you, the will has been carefully prepared to withstand challenge. James was of sound mind and judgment when he signed these documents. There are witnesses, records, and even video evidence of the signing." Claire faltered. Her fury momentarily checked. Daniel, however, rose slowly, his expression icy. "This isn't over." With that, they stormed out, the slam of the office door rattling the glass panes. The silence they left behind was deafening. I stared down at the table, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Mr. Whitman," I whispered, my voice trembling, "why would James—" He placed a steady hand over mine. "Because he loved you, and because he saw what they were becoming long before you did." The weight of his words pressed down on me, heavier than any grief I'd felt that day. My children hadn't just turned on me, they'd turned on their own father, and James had known it. As I left the office alone, I glanced back at the looming Victorian house. For the first time, fear stirred beneath my grief. Claire and Daniel hadn't gotten what they wanted, and people who want something badly enough will do anything to get it. The drive home from Mr. Whitman's office was a blur of wet pavement and swirling leaves. I barely remembered the turns I took or the traffic lights I stopped at. My body was moving on autopilot while my mind stayed trapped in that dim room, replaying his words over and over. "Your husband knew." By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the house cloaked in shadows. It looked lonely, hollow, like a shell without its soul. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, and for a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the front porch where James used to wait for me after my trips into town. It didn't seem real that he was gone, and it seemed even less real that our children, the ones we'd raised together, had turned so cold. Inside, the house smelled of James, coffee, old books, and the faint hint of cedar from his aftershave. My knees almost buckled under me as I stepped into the kitchen. I steadied myself on the counter and let the memories come, flooding me like a tidal wave I couldn't hold back. When I first met James, he was a lanky young man with an easy smile and a stubborn streak a mile wide. I was working part-time at a diner then, saving money for nursing school. He'd come in every Friday evening with his friends, always ordering the same thing: a cheeseburger, fries, and a slice of lemon pie. One night, he left me a note instead of a tip. "I'd like to take you out sometime. If you say no, I'll just keep ordering pie until you do." I said yes. From that day forward, we were inseparable. We didn't have much in those early years, but we had each other. James worked long hours at the hardware store, and I picked up extra shifts wherever I could. We scrimped and saved for our first home, a modest 2-story house on a quiet street. The very house I now stood in alone. When Claire was born, I left nursing school to stay home with her. It wasn't an easy decision, but James and I agreed it was best for our family. A couple of years later, Daniel came along, and our little house was filled with laughter, toys, and sticky fingerprints on every surface. Those were the golden years. I remembered birthday parties with homemade cakes, backyard campouts under the stars, and Christmas mornings so magical they felt like something out of a movie. James and I worked hard to give our children a good life, even when it meant going without ourselves. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It started small. Claire became demanding as a teenager, always wanting the newest clothes, the most expensive gadgets. If we couldn't afford them, she sulked and pouted until James caved. Daniel, quieter by nature, began to mirror his sister's entitlement. I tried to set boundaries. "We can't just give them everything they ask for," I told James one night as we folded laundry in our cramped bedroom. "They need to learn the value of hard work." "They're just kids, Maggie," he said, tiredly rubbing his temples. "I don't want them to feel like they're missing out." His heart was too soft where they were concerned. He didn't see how their gratitude was slowly being replaced by expectation. By the time they left for college, the gap between us and them had grown into a canyon. Phone calls became rare, visits even rarer. When they did come home, it was usually to ask for money or complain about how hard life was. I told myself it was just the way of things. The children grow up and grow distant. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The first real warning sign came 3 years ago when James's health began to falter. He was coughing more, losing weight. The diagnosis, lung cancer, hit us like a wrecking ball. While I focused on his care, Claire and Daniel's priorities became painfully clear. "I don't understand why you're keeping that big house," Claire said one evening, sipping wine at our kitchen table. "It's too much for you to manage, Mom. You and Dad should sell it and move into a condo. You'd have cash left over, and we wouldn't have to worry about upkeep later." The words were sugar-coated, but her eyes gleamed with calculation. Not long after, Daniel suggested we gift the house to him and Claire while we were still alive. "It's just smart, Mom," he insisted. "Avoids all those taxes down the line." James sat quietly through these conversations, his face unreadable. I thought he was just too tired to argue. Now I realized he'd been listening carefully, filing away every hint of their intentions. One memory surfaced, sharp and painful. A few months before James passed, I overheard him on the porch speaking to Claire on the phone. His voice was low but firm, a tone he rarely used with our children. "No, Claire," he said. "Your mother will always have a roof over her head, and it won't come from you. This is her home. She's earned it." At the time, I didn't understand the weight behind those words. Now it was clear. He'd known what they were after, and he'd been preparing for this moment all along. As I sank into James's worn recliner, clutching one of his old flannel shirts, tears burned my eyes. Somewhere between the bedtime stories and the graduations, the hugs and the family vacations, I'd lost my children to greed, and James, bless him, had been the only one brave enough to do what I couldn't, protect me from them. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. My eyes were puffy and raw from crying, and for a brief moment, I didn't remember why. Then everything came crashing back. The will, the fury in Claire's face, Daniel's icy stare. I reached for the phone with trembling hands. 3 missed calls from Claire, 2 from Daniel, a string of text messages stacked up like bullets in my inbox. "Claire, we need to talk. Now." Claire, "You can't seriously think this is fair." Daniel, "Call me back, Mom." Claire, "If you don't fix this, you'll regret it." The last one made my stomach drop. There was no warmth, no daughterly concern, just a threat, naked and sharp. I set the phone down, my pulse pounding. It was barely 7 in the morning. I wasn't ready for this, not today, not so soon after burying my husband. But by mid-afternoon, there was no avoiding them. The first call came from Claire. "Maggie," she began, using my name instead of Mom, her voice clipped and icy. "We're not going to play this little game of yours. You manipulated Dad when he was sick, and you know it." I closed my eyes, trying to stay calm. "Claire, I didn't even know what was in the will until yesterday. Your father—" "Don't you dare put this on him," she snapped. "He loved us. He wouldn't have done this unless you twisted his arm." "Claire," I said softly, "he did love you. But love doesn't mean giving you everything you want." There was a beat of silence, then a bitter laugh. "You've always been jealous of us. You couldn't stand that he cared about us more than you." My hand tightened on the phone. "That's not true. Fix this," she hissed. "Sell the house, split the money, or Daniel and I will take you to court. And trust me, Mom, you don't want to fight us." Before I could reply, the line went dead. For the rest of the day, the phone didn't stop ringing. Daniel didn't yell like Claire. He was quieter, more methodical. "Mom," he said when I finally picked up, his tone eerily calm. "Look, I don't want things to get ugly. Let's just be reasonable." Dad's gone, but we're still family. If you sign the house over to us now, we can avoid all this legal nonsense." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Daniel, your father just died, and you're talking about signing over the house. Can't you see how wrong this is?" His silence was heavy, suffocating. Then he spoke, his voice low and cold. "You can't live there forever. You're getting older. It's too much for you. Why not make things easier for everyone?" The way he said it made my skin crawl. After he hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood as the evening shadows lengthened. I thought of James, of how he'd always sat across from me in that very spot, sipping coffee and reading the paper. "Promise me you'll be strong," he'd whispered on his last night, gripping my hand with surprising force. I hadn't understood what he meant then. Now, I did. That night, as I was locking up, I noticed something odd. The mailbox outside was half open. When I checked it, there was nothing inside, not even junk mail. I frowned. The post office didn't skip deliveries, not around here. Unease prickled the back of my neck. The next day, my neighbor, Mrs. Ellery, waved me over as I collected the paper. "Maggie, I saw Claire's car parked out front late last night. Everything okay, dear?" My heart stopped. "Are you sure it was Claire's car?" "Oh, yes," she said with a knowing nod. "Black SUV, right? She was sitting there for a good while. I almost went out to check on you, but then she drove off." I thanked her, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the paper. Claire had been watching my house. By the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove straight to Mr. Whitman's office, my chest tight with panic. When I told him about the calls, the threats, and Claire lurking outside, his face darkened. "Maggie, this is escalating. We need to take steps now." "What kind of steps?" I asked, my voice trembling. "First, you should have the locks changed immediately," he said. "Second, I want you to consider a restraining order. If they're harassing you or threatening you, the law will be on your side." The thought of legally barring my own children from my home made me feel sick. I can't believe it's come to this." "Maggie," he said gently, "James suspected this might happen. That's why he came to me months ago to make sure everything was airtight. He wanted to protect you even after he was gone." Tears welled in my eyes. I nodded, swallowing hard. Driving home, I passed familiar streets that felt suddenly foreign, sinister. Even the house looked different as I pulled into the driveway, like it was holding its breath, waiting. I changed the locks that evening, bolting the doors before nightfall. As I moved through the silent rooms, James's absence pressed down on me like a weight. But beneath the grief, something new stirred. Anger. My children weren't just hurting me, they were dishonoring their father's memory, and that I couldn't forgive. I didn't know what they would do next, but I did know this. They weren't going to take my home or my future without a fight. The house was quiet, too quiet, as though it sensed the growing storm outside its walls. I stood in James's study with a duster in one hand and an old photograph in the other. The picture was from happier times. James and I on the front porch, the kids sitting on our laps, all of us sunburned and smiling after a day at the lake. I traced the outline of James's face with my fingertip. He looked so alive, so certain, like the man who had always been my rock. I wanted that certainty now, but all I felt was a cold, gnawing fear. The past 3 days had been unbearable. Claire's threats, Daniel's cold persistence, and the eerie sight of Claire's SUV lurking in the shadows outside my house had left me jumpy and sleep-deprived. Every creak of the old house at night felt like a warning. I came to the study to tidy up, to give my restless hands something to do. James's illness had left this room frozen in time. Papers stacked neatly, his pipe resting in its holder, a faint smell of cedar and tobacco lingering in the air. It was his sanctuary. As I dusted the top of his desk, my sleeve brushed against the edge of a picture frame, knocking it over. When I set it upright, I noticed something odd. The back panel was loose. Curiosity prickled through my fear. I carefully removed the backing and found a small folded envelope tucked inside. On the front, in James's handwriting, were the words, "For Maggie, if they turn on you." My breath caught. My knees nearly buckled as I sank into his chair, clutching the envelope to my chest. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat there, staring at the words, my heart pounding. James had known, not just suspected, known. Finally, with trembling fingers, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, James's familiar scrawl filling both sides of the page. His voice came alive in my head as I read, "My darling Maggie, if you are reading this, then my fears have come true. I pray I am wrong, but I have seen our children's hearts harden over the years. I know you wanted to believe the best of them. You always did. But I have witnessed their greed firsthand. Claire and Daniel speak of the house and our savings as though they are prizes to be claimed, not the legacy we built together. They do not see you, Maggie. Not really. They only see what you have and what they believe is owed to them. I could not bear to confront you with this truth while I was alive. You were already carrying too much with my illness. Instead, I did what I could to protect you after I am gone. That is why I went to Henry Whitman months ago to change the will. It was not an easy decision, but it was the right one. The house, the accounts, and everything we built, it belongs to you, no one else. Do not let them bully or frighten you into giving it up. There is one more thing you need to know. I have set aside a reserve account in a safety deposit box at the bank. The key is hidden in the hollow of the old grandfather clock, the one in the hallway. In that box are funds you can use if things become difficult, along with documents that explain every financial decision I made. Maggie, my greatest wish is for you to live your days in peace and safety. Please be strong. Please fight for yourself the way I can no longer fight for you. All my love, always, James. By the time I finished, tears blurred the ink, my sobs breaking the fragile silence of the room. James hadn't just left me behind, he had left me a plan, a lifeline. I rose on shaky legs and went straight to the grandfather clock. My hands shook as I opened the door and reached inside. There, nestled in a hollow behind the pendulum, was a small brass key wrapped in tissue paper. I clutched it to my chest, a spark of determination flaring deep inside me. The next morning, I drove to the bank before it opened, waiting in my car with the doors locked. When they finally let me inside and I opened the safety deposit box, my breath caught again. Inside was a thick envelope stuffed with cash, several documents neatly labeled, and a flash drive. One document explained the legal structure James had set up to protect me. A trust that ensured neither Claire nor Daniel could touch a cent of his estate. Another contained evidence of conversations he'd recorded with them, proof of their intentions should they ever try to claim he'd been coerced. At the very bottom of the box was a smaller note that simply read, "For emergencies only, use wisely." I left the bank with the envelope hidden deep in my purse and a new resolve settling over me. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table reading through the documents, the phone rang again. Claire's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail came through. Her voice was sharp and bitter. "You think you've won, don't you, Mom? You think Dad's little will changes anything? You have no idea what Daniel and I are capable of. We'll get what's ours, one way or another." A chill swept over me, but instead of breaking down, I folded James's letter carefully and tucked it into my pocket. They didn't realize it yet, but I wasn't the fragile widow they thought I was. James had given me the tools to fight back, and I was ready to use them. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house made my heart lurch. At 2 a.m, I found myself standing at the window, peering through the curtains at the empty street below. I clutched James's letter in my hand like a talisman, whispering the words he'd written as if they could form a shield around me. When dawn finally came, I brewed a pot of coffee and tried to focus on practical tasks, changing the locks, contacting the security company Mr. Whitman had recommended. I told myself I was in control, that I was safe. But by late afternoon, the fragile peace shattered. The pounding on the front door started suddenly, loud and violent. "Mom, open this door!" Claire's voice rang out, shrill and commanding. My breath caught. She hadn't called first, hadn't texted. She had just shown up, like a storm descending without warning. I stayed silent, hoping she would leave. Instead, the pounding grew louder. "Don't ignore me, I know you're in there." When I didn't respond, the doorknob rattled furiously. "You think you can just hide from us? From me? Let me in right now." My hands shook as I dialed 911, but I didn't press call. Not yet. "Go away, Claire," I finally said, my voice quivering but firm. "You're not welcome here." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other side of the door. Then her tone shifted, dripping with false sweetness. "Mom, please, we just need to talk. I'm worried about you. Daniel and I, we don't want to fight." Her words might have fooled a stranger, but I knew better. I tightened my grip on the phone. "I'm fine, Claire. Leave me alone." A beat of silence, then soft but venomous. "If you don't open this door, you'll regret it." Before I could respond, I heard another voice, Daniel's. "Claire." His tone was low, controlled, dangerous. "Step back. Let me handle this." My stomach churned as their voices faded briefly, then returned louder as they began arguing just outside. "You're too emotional," Daniel hissed. "And you're too damn cold," Claire snapped back. "We need to make her understand." Their footsteps shuffled. Then suddenly, there was a loud bang against the door, like a shoulder hitting the wood. I screamed, stumbling back. "Mom!" Daniel's voice now, sharp and cutting. "Stop playing games. You owe us. Dad promised us that house, and you know it." "No, Daniel," I shouted through the door, anger surging through my fear. "Your father promised me he'd protect me. This is my home, and you have no right to it." There was a stunned pause, followed by Claire's mocking laugh. "Listen to yourself," she sneered. "An old woman clinging to a house she can't even manage. You think you can keep us out forever. You can't even keep the lights on without Dad." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let them see me falter. "You don't scare me," I said, though my voice trembled. "Leave now, or I'll call the police." "You wouldn't dare," Daniel said coldly. My thumb hovered over the call button. "Try me," I snapped, pressing down. The line connected. 911, what's your emergency?" "My children are outside my home," I said, my voice breaking. "They're threatening me. I need help." For the first time, I heard uncertainty in Claire's tone. "Mom, wait." But I didn't wait. "They're trying to break in," I told the dispatcher. "Send someone fast." The wail of sirens cut through the tense silence minutes later. Claire and Daniel bolted as soon as they heard them, tires screeching as their SUV sped down the street. 2 officers arrived, calm and professional. I showed them the texts, the voicemails, the fresh dents in my door. They didn't need convincing. "Mrs. Turner," one officer said, his tone serious, "we're filing an official report. Given the threats you've received, we strongly recommend a restraining order." My chest tightened. "They're my children," I whispered. "They're also trespassers," the other officer said gently, "and they're escalating. You need to protect yourself." As they left, I stood in the doorway, watching the flashing lights disappear into the night. The house seemed to exhale around me, settling into uneasy silence once more. Later, as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the full weight of the evening hit me. My own children had tried to force their way into my home. They'd looked at me not with love, but with hunger, like predators circling prey. I unfolded James's letter again, smoothing the creases with trembling hands. "You saw this coming," I whispered. "You knew." And now I knew, too. If Claire and Daniel were willing to intimidate me, they might be willing to go much further. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about survival. I wasn't going to let them destroy me or James's memory. Tomorrow, I would meet with Mr. Whitman again and take every legal step possible to cut them off completely. And if that didn't stop them, I would be ready for whatever came next. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, pale and tentative. It was the first clear day in weeks, but instead of bringing comfort, it only revealed how starkly empty the house felt. James's presence still lingered in the worn grooves of his recliner, in the faint scent of his aftershave clinging to his jacket in the hall closet. But the warmth was gone. I wrapped myself in my robe and stood at the window, watching the world wake up. Across the street, Mrs. Ellery was watering her flower beds, oblivious to the chaos of my life. I envied her normalcy. Today, everything would change. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark blue sweater James had once said brought out my eyes, and drove to Mr. Whitman's office. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly the entire way, knuckles white, heart pounding. When I walked into his office, Mr. Whitman rose immediately. "Maggie," he said with genuine concern, "are you all right? The officer called me last night and filled me in." I sank into the chair opposite him. "I'm not all right," I admitted, "but I'm ready to be." He nodded solemnly. "Then let's make sure you're protected." We spent the next 2 hours drafting legal documents. Mr. Whitman helped me file for an emergency restraining order against both Claire and Daniel, backed by the police report, the voicemails, and even the dented door frame. "These will take effect immediately," he explained, sliding the papers across the desk for me to sign. "If they come within 50 feet of you or your home, you can have them arrested on the spot." My hand trembled as I signed, but it wasn't from fear, it was from resolve. We also discussed the trust James had set up. "Your husband was very thorough," Mr. Whitman said with admiration. "The way he structured this estate leaves them no room to contest it successfully. Even if they try, the courts will side with you." Relief washed over me, though it was tinged with sadness. James had spent his final months protecting me from a future he'd known was coming. Before I left, Mr. Whitman placed a hand over mine. "You are stronger than you think, Maggie. James believed that. Now you need to believe it, too." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you for everything." Back home, I took immediate steps to secure the house. The security company installed cameras and reinforced locks on every door and window. For the first time in days, I felt like the house was truly mine again, no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary. That evening, I stood in the garden. James had loved so much. The late September air was crisp, the scent of fallen leaves mingling with the earthy smell of soil. I dug a small hole near the porch and planted a young rosebush, its roots fragile, but full of promise. James had always wanted roses in this spot, but never had the chance to plant them himself. As I pressed the earth around the base, I whispered, "For you, my love, and for me." 2 days later, I received a call from the police. Claire and Daniel had been served with the restraining orders. They were less than pleased, the officer admitted, his tone careful. I pictured their faces, twisted with anger, and felt a pang deep in my chest. No mother dreams of protecting herself from her own children, but I couldn't let sentimentality destroy me. That evening, I found a moment of stillness. I brewed a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table with James's letter spread out before me. I read it slowly, savoring every word, until the tears blurred the ink once more. But this time, my tears weren't only for grief, they were for gratitude, too. James hadn't just left me an inheritance. He'd given me the strength to carry on, even when everything felt impossible. The next morning, I visited the cemetery. The sun was warm on my face as I knelt beside James's grave, the marble stone cool beneath my fingertips. "I did it, James," I whispered. "They can't hurt me anymore. You kept your promise even after you were gone, and now I'm keeping mine." I pulled a single white rose from my bag and laid it gently on the grave. "I'll be all right," I said, my voice steady. "I'll make sure this house stays filled with love just like you wanted, and I'll make sure your scholarship helps those kids you cared so much about." A breeze stirred the trees overhead, and for a moment it felt like James was there beside me, smiling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood on the porch of our home. The lights inside glowed warmly, spilling onto the lawn. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel afraid. I thought of Claire and Daniel's laughter at the funeral, their whispered words, "She's next." Then the house is finally ours. They'd been wrong. I wasn't next. I was still here. And this house, my house, was still mine. As the sky turned gold and violet, I whispered into the cool evening air, "You thought you could break me, but I'm stronger than you ever imagined." Then I turned, closed the door behind me, and stepped fully into my future. Final closing note. The story ends with Maggie not only securing her safety and protecting her husband's legacy, but also reclaiming her own strength. She begins her next chapter knowing she survived betrayal, grief, and fear, and came out stronger than anyone expected. 6 weeks later, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if the walls themselves had finally exhaled. It was early November now, the air crisp and cool. Leaves carpeted the yard in fiery shades of orange and red, and the rose bush I'd planted for James had taken root, its first tiny buds already showing signs of life. I stood at the window with a cup of tea, looking out over the yard. For the first time since James's funeral, I felt at peace. Not completely healed, that would take time, but steady, whole. The legal battles were over. Claire and Daniel hadn't dared come near me since the restraining order was issued. According to Mr. Whitman, they had consulted several attorneys about contesting the will, but none would take their case after seeing the evidence James had left behind. There had been no tearful apologies, no attempts at reconciliation, just silence. A silence I welcomed, even as it left an ache in my heart where my children should have been. That morning, I packed a small box with items for the local community center. Books James had loved, puzzles he and I had completed together on quiet winter nights, a few of his old fishing hats. The scholarship James had set up was already in motion. 2 bright, determined students had been selected for the first round of funding, both kids who reminded me of the kind of young man James had once been. Hard-working, full of potential, eager to make something of themselves. When I met them last week, I'd felt a warmth in my chest I hadn't experienced in months. It was proof that something good had come from all the pain. After dropping off the box, I stopped by the bakery downtown and treated myself to a warm apple tart. The owner, Mrs. Lopez, greeted me with a smile. "Good to see you out and about, Maggie," she said kindly. "You've been through so much." I returned her smile, small but genuine. "Thank you. I'm getting there." As I walked back to my car, I realized she was right. I was getting there. Slowly but surely, I was building a new life. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I lit a candle on the porch. James had always loved this ritual during the fall. A single flame shining in the growing dark, a reminder that even the smallest light could push back the night. I sat in the rocking chair he'd built by hand, the wood worn smooth from years of use, and let the cool evening air wash over me. My thoughts drifted back to the funeral, to Claire and Daniel's laughter behind my back. "She's next," they'd said. "Then the house is finally ours." At the time, their words had felt like a death sentence. Now they felt like nothing more than echoes of a battle I'd already won. I closed my eyes and whispered into the twilight, I survived. We survived, James. The breeze stirred gently, carrying the scent of roses from the garden. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like a widow lost in grief. I felt like a woman standing firmly in her own life, her own story. The house behind me glowed warmly, filled not with fear or sorrow, but with love. The kind of love that couldn't be stolen, no matter how hard anyone tried. I rose from the chair, went inside, and closed the door behind me. This was my home, my future, and I was finally ready to live in it.